Hello people, today I am Inko. Soulstice is a brand new cognitive behavioral therapy product where the player is given a big sword and a woman to use. Your task is to use that sword as a means to live out your greatest power fantasy, while also taking clear inspirations from Berserk and Claymore. And much like Claymore, you play as an offbeat young gal new to the city, meeting new and interesting people, all while trying to navigate the perils of adult life. But she soon realizes that no one told her life is going to be this way. When you start the game, you're broke, your job is the joke, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna die horribly. Yet none of that is truly important compared to the ass beating that you are required to give to the citizens of New Jersey, who will attack you in what I can only describe as ungodly hordes. Your task is not just to overcome the enemy, but destroy and demolish them in the most stylish way you can muster, all wrapped up in a plot of questionable quality. Set in the Nana universe, you are sent to look for the best, most romantic tourist spots the city has to offer, and possibly remove the locals. Equipped with more weapons than the average college security guard, a thing too big to be called a sword, and our sister who has a tendency to pop when nervous, we go alone into the apocalypse, confronting our fellow man at their lowest, a sexually active serial killer bikini and his giant bird wife, fan favorite Berserk character Donovan, and the skinniest Discord mod. So if that cock and ball therapy description interests you, then take a seat, smash that like and subscribe, and join me as we descend into the heart of Soulstice. There is no better way to start our journey than at the beginning, but Soulstice doesn't know that, so we start in medias res, throwing us headfirst into one of the final battles of the game. But before we get to see any of that, we must endure a Kingdom Hearts recap that explains the lore of the game. And since we haven't seen a single bit of the world, I will proudly forget everything she said. After that introduction, we begin the game in earnest. We play as Briar, which is a fitting name because it means prick. At her side, her sister Lute, who is very fish-like. And yes, indeed, I can change her color at will. That's what happens when your character is the brightest thing in the room. Anyway, Briar and her GameStop exclusive RGB keyboard arrive in Lothric Castle and remain there for the rest of the game. Our goal is to seal the Devil's Anus, which has opened above the city of Ilden, causing all its residents to mutate into horrific abominations to which we will show no mercy. Alongside that, we seek answers to questions such as, what happened to the others who came before us? Why were we sent here? Why is Briar such a bitch? These questions are eventually answered via the Naked Dimension, but for now all we need to know is that Briar and Lute are Chimera, which means they kill things with a big sword. But also they went through cardiovascular surgery in order to fuse themselves together, kind of involuntarily. Such a procedure allows the person to do CrossFit without permanent injury, while the corpse becomes an RGB apparel with no self-autonomy but retaining complete sentience. Which might as well be our introduction to the combat. Unlike its namesake, Soulstice is not a Souls-like, which is a groundbreaking innovation in the world of independent video games. Adding to that, it is neither a Metroidvania or a roguelike, which is why I was drawn to the game in the first place. Rather, Soulstice does a ballsy move of trying to imitate the spectacle fighter genre like your Devil May Cry's and God of Wars of old. While it may be imitating, it manages to carve an identity of its own in its gameplay, and as such requires you to rip and tear into enemies with as many combos as you can while also avoiding damage at all costs. On the most simplistic level, Soulstice is a game about hitting and dodging. The more you hit, the more your chances to do the crazy anime moves or enter monkey mode increases. Dodging ensures that you reach these thresholds as fast as possible, effectively creating a combat system that favors not just the violent but the skilled. On a more substantial level, you wield 7 weapons in total, eventually, all of which have their own set of moves that you have to contend and memorize in order to use. Adding to that, you can pull these weapons out of your ass at a moment's notice, chaining together combos. Meaning that if you start an attack with the Ashen Vindicator, you can switch to the hand cannon in order to do its finishing move. This is an important revelation as you soon find out that combos are fucking long and enemies don't like to stand still. So on easier difficulties, going monkey mode by button mashing until your controller breaks is preferable and at times even optimal. But on any other difficulty, you have to stop and think, but not for too long. So considering certain weapons are much faster than others, it ensures the player won't just stick to using one weapon and creates variation. Not getting hit also increases your synergy bar that allows you to do the big damage. It can only be done after a successful combo, and I'm not very skilled at the game, so I can barely hit bosses with it. But more importantly than that, it is essential to activating the double trigger, which makes Briar go a bit silly. If you happen to be on low health, well, Briar goes apeshit and attacks everything in sight while ignoring your controller inputs. It's quite cool. One thing to consider is that Briar is a fucking chimp, so she only knows how to parry using her face. You can use the actual parry that comes with the fist, but good luck timing that. You can barely tell what the enemy is doing most of the time. Facial parries are quite painful, so in order to avoid this, you have Lute, who despite her state of incorporealism can bounce attacks, can stop the flow of time, and can flashbang the screen. Furthermore, the game introduces color-coded enemies that require you to use Lute's bubble abilities to fight. The implementation of these enemies are, they're kinda shit. The bubble lasts 4 seconds before Lute dies and the enemy health does not get lower. It gets even more fucky when they keep throwing 2 colors into the fight because you can't use big attacks without bouncing off the others. But you may stop and ask, what the fuck are we fighting? Well, I don't know. I'm sure they explain it somewhat, but to me they are just things to punch. Considering variation, certain enemies will react differently to what weapon you use. Basic grunts will die equally to any attack, but the giant armor men will absorb anything you throw at them unless we punch them. Some enemies acquire shields and the fastest way to destroy it is through the arcane method of stabbing. And then there's this piece of shit who's just, how the fuck do you beat him? There are many more enemies, each one cuter than the previous one, that will keep you on your toes or on the floor, and figuring out how best to beat their ass was a great joy. On the most esoteric level, big sword hit big monster. No stats, no RPG mechanics, no fucking stamina bar, just you and the visceral action. And boy do they drive the violence home. Every weapon has its own distinct feel. The giant hammer will shake the world when you hit something. The knives feel too fast for the human eye. The bow is okay. When you fire off your hand cannons, you feel that weight. Adding to that, enemies will explode into bits of gore. They don't just die, they fucking explode, throwing viscera, guts, and cum all over the screen. The game is unapologetically edgy. Characters will unironically say shit like,
"The corruption burns within me at all times. It never stops."
Unapologetically taking the best parts of Claymore for itself, implementing it to the story, various parts of the gameplay and the enemies, resulting in spectacle at every turn, and letting that spectacle shine in its boss fights, who are an amalgamation of everything the game has introduced. I love this shit. However, perfection does not exist and Soulstice finds itself on another continent of jankiness that I would be remiss not to talk about. Soulstice takes place in the city of Ilden that is definitely not Yharnam and most certainly not Falconia. It's a city that's been around so long no one actually remembers why it exists, but as the myth and legend dictate, Ilden was founded after the 3 gods banned all the shitposters who went by the name of the Spawn of Chaos, and now a man has fallen into the river at Ilden City. Start the new rescue going. We can enjoy looking at the city through 40 different camera angles in under 5 minutes, because you see, Soulstice really wants to be like its big brother, so it imitates certain aspects for the better or worse. Devil May Cry has a difficulty called human, therefore so do we. DMC has a man in his 40s with parenting issues, well so does Soulstice. Amongst the other things that are imitated are the camera angles from games of the past. During the fights you have free reign over the camera, and it does the job quite well. Outside of combat you may notice the camera's a bit fixed, much like the other games of the same genre. But you see, those games had the fixed camera because of technical limitations, or the map didn't actually exist, or the camera was too shitty to be trusted to work the entire time, or because Yoko Taro's a fucking meth addict. This is a bad thing for Soulstice. Not quite, but it is very inconsistent. Sometimes the camera will give you a wide shot to see the entire cityscape, and other times it just inverts the direction you're walking in and you start running the wrong way. The biggest drawback of the fixed angle is the absence of depth perception. It's especially annoying when you're platforming, which is quite frequently, and the camera won't let you gauge how much you need to jump. Sometimes the fixed camera will stay while you fight. This works only for bosses because it lets you have a clear view of the chaos. Other times it makes fighting less fun. For starters, the depth issue returns, but this time it's worse because you can't hit anything and you're gonna die. The camera being placed in one spot also means that it's very easy to lose sight of where you are when you just blend together with the grey environments. Levels in this game are quite linear as you would expect, serving as a backdrop to your violence. Throughout the game you see quite impressive views, like fighting through a burning village, seeing how the upper city has turned into a frozen wasteland, the broken cathedral at the end of the game, a city once proud and powerful now reduced to this. But for the majority of the game we spend our time gazing at even more beautiful vistas, such as the sewers, or the same bridge 5 times, a cramped elevator that loses ground but also adds a shit ton of enemies to compensate. Or my favorite, a giant sprawling maze that's incredibly annoying to navigate because of how many paths there are and because the camera keeps switching orientations, leaving me in complete confusion as to where I am. It took me about an hour to get through this. There are 25 missions in this game, but truthfully I can only tell you about 4 of them. Why is this? Is it because I have the memory of a child? Is it because I never played the game? No, it's because of how unremarkable a lot of the parts of the stages are. In fact, I once spent 40 minutes on the same level. What was I doing? Well, just running around it seems. A lot of the levels feel like they're padded out, reusing the same places and set pieces from previous levels. How many times will I have to go inside these sewers? Haven't I been here already and fought the exact same layout of enemies? These repeating parts could have been cut out and I would have been none the wiser. In fact, I think shorter levels would have been better for the game overall. And yes, I know the character action genre is repetitive, but it's worth mentioning that Soulstice is a long ass game, made to feel even longer due to its pacing. The pacing in this game is very arrhythmic. Chapters are separated by cutscenes, nudity, and action, which should make progression feel smoother, but they don't. You see, I think the developers realized they had too many levels and not a lot of weapons or skills to even things out, so to counteract this, they increased the price of upgrades to a ridiculous extent. This is how much Loot's final upgrade costs, and this is how much I make on average per level, and her abilities are pretty damn important since she automatically does shit for you. So yes, the game's combat is very wide and the skill ceiling is very penile, but your first playthrough of the game will be a castrated one since you won't have the full extent of your capabilities until the end of the game. And even then, you're going to be left grinding very high prices to get the last of your skills. This also applies to health increases. Like in DMC, you complete challenges to get an item. Get 3 of these and you have more health. But the challenge is like, no, they're not fun and feel more like the game exploiting its own combat weaknesses to call it a challenge. Defeat all the enemies without hitting the ground. Defeat all the enemies in the air, but I only have about 3 air attacks. This isn't DMC, okay? I can't juggle people in the air with my guns. Kill everything inside the circle, sure, but why does every attack I do have knockback? Stay the fuck still. Considering this is a game of the long ass variety, and how long some of the levels drag on, it really dampers its replayability. One thing I enjoy about DMC 5 is being able to knock out the game in one sitting. Soulstice for me is like a weak endeavor. With these kind of games, I feel like there's a perfect length that makes me want to keep replaying through it. After beating Soulstice for the first time, I really didn't feel like jumping back in to see the same hallways and set pieces, but it's the combat that always keeps me playing. The stupid amount of difficulties, the propensity these games have for relaxation and chilling, the feel of the weapons, the story, the story. Action game stories usually are a string of dumb shit happening meant to devise a reason for you to go wild on enemies, the majority of them focusing on delivering a stupid but overall entertaining experience that will eventually get drowned out on repeat playthroughs. Soulstice goes a different direction by telling a serious, no nonsense, no silliness, grim story. So that means no dance-offs, no deeply moving political speeches, no plotlines about Virgil, no Shakespeare, and no joy. Every character in this game is having a really bad time, except this guy, he seems to be enjoying himself. Soulstice spends a lot of time world building. It uses its story moments to explore more in depth whatever the fuck happened to the city and also explain what the organization we belong to does and how they work. And if you've read Claymore, you should already know what's up. We see a lot of backstory to enemies and how they became like that, as well as putting focus on the 2 sisters and how being fused together means that Briar has to pay income tax twice. And yes, just like Claymore, using too much power makes you transcend and turn into a monster, mostly because it feels good. And it focuses on that struggle of both sides, human and monster. While side characters don't exactly get a lot of spotlight, they do have explosive personalities that make them memorable. Like being psychotic or acting like they're going through a divorce. And better yet, sometimes they don't talk at all. Even the shopkeeper adds a bit to the world as he's basically there to fill in some blanks. He even gets a funny crow as his companion, but they got rid of him pretty quickly. This may be a nitpick, but I feel like the constant dour tone really takes away from the story and gives it a bland feel. Like, yay, more suffering, that's fun. Oh, haha, look at these corpses. But it never crosses into edgelord territory. There's never a time where a confrontation with a monster is simply screaming fuck you at it, or Virgil shooting a woman twice. I'll say, the world building in this game keeps itself interesting and makes me want to see more of it, instead of just one city. I won't spoil it, mostly because you should discover it on your own, but also, I don't remember half of it. I only know, I want to see more of these knights and more about how this definitely not evil organization works and what they want. At the center of it all, of course, is Briar and Loot, and I gotta be completely honest, I kinda don't like Briar. For starters, her nipples are too small. No, but seriously, story-wise, I think she's alright. She's this angry knight who's been forced into killing shit for a living, and with Loot hanging around, she's reminded of her own failure, so that feeds even more to her anger and guilt. All of which ends up being too much for her, and she goes apeshit multiple times, constantly failing to keep her own humanity in check, hurting Loot even more in the process. Which of course is represented in gameplay when Briar starts acting on her own, like I previously explained. During these parts you act as Loot, driving away the darkness or whatever and making Briar normal again. Which might I add is an integration of story and gameplay I most definitely love. And as the story progresses, we learn that Briar isn't really all that strong, and rather it's Loot who's the real OG because she's going through the same things as Briar while taking the brunt of her anger, while also dealing with the fact that she's dead, and on top of that she now has to make sure her sister doesn't explode. In general, I really do like seeing the relationship between these 2 sisters. In another universe, they could have been a funny crime-solving duo. Loot specifically surprised me as when I first started the game I expected her to be annoyingly pacifistic, condemning the actions of her sister. But I turned out to be very wrong about that, as Loot serves as an important pillar to support Briar. And by the end, you really get a feel for how these 2 sisters depend and care for each other. And I got, dare I say, invested. Also, big respect to the voice actors who voices both of them. I mean, I would have never been able to tell. All this shit I vibe with, but Briar as an action game prototype falls flat. She doesn't have the meaty leading man parts like Dante or Bayonetta or Juliet Starling or Marlo Brick. For the most part, she's just angry most of the time. Even in flashbacks when she's just a normal girl, she seems pissed at something.
So he'll love it.
I guess I can chalk that up to her situation, but come on, man. She's also not particularly well characterized either. I really couldn't tell you one thing about her that's not related to the main story. What does she want? What is Briar hoping to do after all this shit passes? If she weren't fused with Lou, what would she be doing? What is her favorite anime? It makes Briar feel a bit boring and devoid of personality, and in my opinion, action games need that leading character to be memorable. They need to have that protagonist charisma. With Briar, I really don't feel that, even in the way she looks. She mostly dresses in Guts cosplay. I prefer her later look without the armor. And not just because boobs, but rather her without the armor just looks more original to the game and has its own visual identity. What I'm trying to say is I really wanted to know more about her. Overall, the story is pretty enjoyable, albeit a bit predictable, especially if you've read Claymore. But it definitely left an impression, and its commitment to being a serious story is something that in hindsight I really enjoyed, and I do hope it gets a proper conclusion because that ending left me quite flaccid. In the end, Soulstice is a pretty banger game with some glaring grievances that bring me more annoyance than joy, but they're not so rampant that they destroy my enjoyment of the game. If it felt like I was a bit harsh on it, it's only because I really like the game. And after weeks of writing and debating with my team and random people online, I think I can finally give a definitive answer to a question I've had since day one. Is Briar cute? And I'm glad to say yes. Yes, she is. Now go play Soulstice. It's the only seinen video game in existence. Anyway, that's all the nut I've got to give today. Do the thing with the like and subscribe. More videos coming eventually when they're ready. And that's about it. See ya.